Good afternoon. Welcome to part 7 in our series, Leading with Personality. And today we are going to get into figuring out why some supervisors seem uptight. I think that I don't know because I pride myself on trying to be culturally humble and culturally curious. I don't think that I've ever heard that uptight has sort of connotations that are used negatively around gender or race. But I should look into that because I think there are related words that might be. So, as I thought of that title, it did give me pause a little bit. But once we get into this, I hope you'll understand the spirit of what I'm talking about here. So, let's get into today. This is my intro. For those of you who've seen my webinars before or seen me do keynotes or workshops, you know this pretty well. I worked in higher education for 20 years. Prior to that, I was in finance. I was in sales. I've done a lot of different kinds of work. And now I work with corporations, with municipal governments, universities and colleges, K-12 organizations, and nonprofits on leadership development. And so I've been working with Adaptive Challenge Consulting since 2014 when I founded it. So we are going on 12 years now, which is exciting. And so the next thing I want to mention is that anytime I'm doing a workshop, I need to talk about this because a lot of organizations you might be part of, oftentimes treat DEI one of two ways. Either they're committed to it and they'll sort of do a workshop a year on something having to do with race or something having to do with gender or sexual orientation or a safe zone training. They'll do sort of a once a year thing to check the box off. And then some organizations don't really want to talk about it at all. At Adaptive Challenge Consulting, we believe that unless everyone you're supervising is exactly like you, diversity is in your space. And so we want to teach leaders how to lead across difference. Inclusion, one of the things I believe in my first book, Leading with Emotional Intelligence, I explained that the fundamental of all leading is through listening. And so leaders who listen effectively are by nature inclusive, right? So diversity and inclusion are already parts of most of our spaces if you have good leaders and if not everybody you work with is the same. Equity is a different bar. Equity is a different standard. Some organizations are more committed to equity than others, but that's a topic for another time. The important thing here is, though, that to be a leader, you need to have some awareness of the edges and boundaries of your own culture, some humility about the edges and boundaries of your own culture, and some curiosity about other cultures, because there are a lot of stereotypes that we have to sift through. But curiosity is an incredibly important part of leadership, especially in the AI age. And we can talk about that another time. For those of you who've never joined, I tend to show this logo, the FedEx logo, the negative space between the E and the X. That negative space has an arrow. And legitimately, I do work with large management groups. I do keynote speeches. 25 to 33%, so between 1/4 and 1/3 of every audience I engage has never seen that arrow until I point it out. And so I explained that once you see it, there's good news and bad news. The good news is you've seen it, but the bad news is also that you've seen it. There's no going back. You cannot go la 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 and then look and then suddenly it be gone. Once you've perceived it, you can't unperceive it. So today, my hope is that something from our lesson about how some managers are perceived as uptight will be a FedEx arrow moment for you. If you're in the chat, say hi. Let me know where you're from. But we're going to keep moving. Oh, and real quick, and if you've been part of this series, I've made this disclaimer at the beginning of each part. I fully recognize that Jung's work, which the Myers-Briggs is based on, we're going to be talking about the Myers-Briggs type indicator, that Jung's work was flawed, that his methodology of his study at the time wouldn't stand up to most modern university methodological requirements for an IRB and things like that. And I think that if we acknowledge that, we can take it with a grain of salt. Similarly, apparently, I just found this out 4 or 5 years ago that Isabella Briggs Myers also wrote a fiction book. Don't know what it's about, but apparently the fiction book had some racial stereotypes. So we need to be aware that Jung did his work in Europe, that Isabella Briggs Myers had racial stereotypes that she held, that she put into print. And so we need to keep those in mind. Does that mean that we need to throw this framework out? I don't think so. I think that if we are aware and responsible with it, it can still help us on our journey to be better leaders. So that's why I work with this framework. But I do want to acknowledge both of those things. So preference, we've talked about this throughout this series. Preference is just preference. It's not about skill. A lot of different assessments out there, whether it's DISC, Strengths Finders, one of the underlying notions is that it's sort of measuring how good we are at things so that management knows where to place us. Some people think that the Myers-Briggs does this too, but it does not. The Myers-Briggs does not tell us how good we are at anything. I am not better or worse at extroverting. That's not a thing. The Myers-Briggs is just about preferences, whether you have a preference for extroversion or introversion, a preference for sensing or intuition as far as how you absorb the world. As far as when you make decisions, it's a preference for thinking or feeling. That's the third letter. Today, though, we're going to lean into the fourth letter of the Myers-Briggs. It's either judging or perceiving, J or P. And we're going to talk about that at work. So again, that sort of J and P thing. Let's see here. I'm having some tech glitches here. There we go. Extrovert, introvert. So you see judging and perceiving is the final letter. The thing that's interesting about this is that the judging perceiving dichotomy has two different functions. One sort of an everyday work stereotype. The other one's a deep, meaningful way of how to use the Myers-Briggs to understand what makes you tick the most and understand a little bit about how you operate under stress. So this final letter, if you read Jung's work, Jung established these first three dichotomies: extrovert, introvert, intuitive sensing, feeling and thinking. He implied that fourth dichotomy. Isabella Briggs Myers really was the one who codified that fourth letter and gave it life through her instrument. So just as a quick refresher, extroversion and introversion are your preference for getting energy, all other things being equal. This doesn't mean extroverts are always social or introverts are always not social, not at all. It just means that when all other things are equal, extroverts will have a preference for energizing from the outside and introverts energizing from the inside when all other things are equal. But not all other things are equal, because sometimes the second letter, sensing and intuition, chimes in. Sensing is a preference for absorbing the world through granular data, through individual pieces, through outlines, looking at a picture and describing what's on the picture. The other side of that dichotomy is intuition or intuitive preference, which is not looking at what's on a picture, but what's happening within the picture, looking at context, absorbing information through different schema or schemata, these ideas of categorizing things together and trying to find similarities and patterns. This is more intuitive. And then the third one, judging, the third one is how you make a judgment call, thinking and feeling. Do you lean more on logic, thinking, or do you lean more on person-centered decisions, feeling? I don't know if y'all picked it up from this slide, but in this slide, you'll notice the second letter, it says, how do you perceive the world? See the binoculars. The third letter, you see, how do you make a judgment call, make a decision? Perceiving and judging are built in there, and each of them refers to one of the middle two letters of the Myers-Briggs. So the judging perceiving thing that we get at the end, I mentioned it has two meanings, and this is what we're going to get into. The first meaning is sort of what I'd call our organizational social style, or a social organizational style. And our social organizational style is sort of kind of the level of organization that we are committed to at work. So first of all, I want to dispel the notion that judging personalities means judgmental, right? Judging and judgmental have nothing to do with each other. Judging is about making judgment calls. Perceiving is about how you absorb the world. But interestingly, people whose focus is judging tend to have certain things flow from their preference, and people who have a perceiving preference have other things that tend to flow from their preference. So organizational styles. I don't know of those of you on the webinar right now, how many of you love your to-do list? And so when I say love your to-do list, what I mean is I know people who have what I would call a relationship with their to-do list. What I mean by that is that I know people who will create a list, and maybe they've got 15 things on their list, and they do something today that was not on their list, but should have been on their list. And they've already completed it. Maybe it's wash the dishes. Maybe it's take out the trash. Maybe it's file a report with my boss. Whatever it is, if they completed it and it wasn't on the list, some of these folks will retroactively go back to the list to add it to the list so they can have the joy of marking it off the list. If you've had that kind of experience, if you've had feelings about your to-do list, emotions related to that, it's likely you have a judging preference. It's not necessarily, but it's likely you have a judging preference. People with judging preferences tend to prefer closure. They tend to prefer action. They tend to prefer getting things completed. People with judging preferences, I'm always impressed with the level of commitment they seem to have in completing tasks and completing projects. It seems built in. Most of their workspaces are pretty organized. Again, all other things being equal, because there are other things that make up our Myers-Briggs types as well that might be a little less linear. Um, However, in general, people with a J preference, judging preference, like closure. Similarly, they prefer when things go according to plan and don't love it when things go off the rails, right? That's not their preference. Across the table, the opposite of that is what we call the perceivers. The perceivers are not necessarily the slackers of the world, right? It's not as though they don't, uh, have to-do lists as well, but perceivers aren't as emotionally connected to organization and closure as many of their judging preference counterparts are. And so I'm a perceiver. I have a lifelong history of being a perceiver. And I'll just say that um, perceivers have a preference towards options, towards possibilities more than closure. Does it mean perceivers can't complete a project? No, it doesn't mean that. But it does mean that there's not the same kind of emotional connection, drive, or preference for the feeling of completing things. There's more of a preference for the feeling of options and possibilities. I've told people in the past that when I worked in student affairs, I worked in student affairs for 20 years. I had 17 different supervisors in 20 years, 17 in 20 years. And so what that means is I had to develop a lot of autonomy. I had to be very autonomous. I had to understand best practices, next practices, how to operate without a supervisor, or how to operate with a supervisor who was new, who would take a year to figure out what was going on at our institution. And because of that, my to-do list style was interesting. I would have these things on my to-do list, and my new supervisor would sometimes come in and say, well, now that I'm here, we're going to start doing this, this, and this. I'm like, okay, great. And I would put them on the list. I'm like, we're going to do these things for the new person. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, I wonder how long this new person's going to last. Are these new initiatives about best practices that I'm well versed in, or best practices that I need to catch up on, or are these out of ego and the new boss trying to like flex and show that he's in charge, or she's in charge, or they're in charge, or whatever. And so I would honestly have things on my to-do list, and I would complete so many things that these would get bumped, and I would just create a new to-do list and carry these things forward. Some of these new initiatives that I knew in my gut weren't well conceived, or weren't going to become high priorities once that new boss of mine understood their environment better, right? So that is something as a perceiver that fit my personality pretty well. Here's the other thing, though. Here's the other way to understand the judging and perceiving dichotomy, is that everybody's Myers-Briggs type has two middle letters. Those two middle letters are what I call the function letters. The second letter is the function of how you prefer to absorb the world, sensing or intuition. And the third letters the function of making decisions or judgment calls, thinking or feeling. But these are both distinct processes. So the J and the P, the judging and the perceiving dichotomy, helps people like me understand which of those two middle letters is your dominant in Jungian terms, which is your subdominant, your second, what's your tertiary, and what's your inferior. The four is called the inferior. Isabella Briggs Myers also calls it the blind spot. Don't know if that language is ableist or not, but what I do know is it's meant to evoke something that's hard to perceive about ourselves, right? And so I'm going to take you through this in just a second. So keep in mind the J and the P, one way to understand it is that most of the people in your office spaces, in your workspaces, in your learning environments who are oriented towards closure, have a really strong day planner or calendar or to-do list, and they're just they seem always on it. They read their emails frequently, probably have judging preferences. And the people who read their emails less frequently don't have quite the same organizational cachet, but tend to thrive when things don't go quite according to plan, might be your perceivers. That's one way of understanding it. But this second way of using judging and perceiving to point to the middle letters is the more important way to understand this. It's also a little bit confusing. Before we go into that, though, I'm going to kind of lean back into this first way, and tell you some of how this preference shows up in real life. People with judging preferences when looking at a menu at a restaurant, especially if it's a restaurant they've been to, usually have a strong feel for something that they know they like. If the person shares S, T, and J in their type, introvert or extrovert doesn't matter, but STJ, they're probably very much a creature of habit. And if they always get the chicken parmesan sub, they always get the chicken parmesan sub, right? Meanwhile, and this is sort of under the category of all things being equal, someone who has N for their second letter, intuition, feeling for their third letter, feeling, the NF combination, we call those the idealists. Someone who's an NFJ, probably, like most people with J preferences, has something on the menu they know they like and is probably secretly wondering if there's something better. That intuition and that feeling pulls at them and says, this is so great, but I wonder if there's something better out there, right? Um, I live with two J's. My wife and my youngest son have J preferences, and I have a P preference. And sometimes if we go to a restaurant and they know that I get this certain thing and they don't have that thing on the menu anymore, they're so apologetic. Like my son will say, Dad, I'm so sorry that that's not there anymore. And my wife will go say, oh, I know you really loved that. I'm really, really sorry that they got rid of that. And me over in perceiver world, I'm like, I thank you for being sorry. And sure, I am bummed that that's not on the menu, but there's probably something else great, right? That by definition, perceiving preference folks tend to, when there's a situation where things don't go according to plan, things aren't as they were, tend to sort of approach that as though it's a new opportunity, a new possibility. Meanwhile, people with the judging preferences are like apologizing to you. Oh, I'm so sorry that this went away. And so it's really interesting because I tell them, I'm like, you don't have to apologize. I did like it, but I can find another thing that I like. And when they hear me say that, they probably think to themselves, because they're both judging preferences and introvert preferences, they probably think to themselves, gosh, it's going to take a long time for me to figure out the new thing I like, right? And so for me, it's an adventure. For them, it might be a puzzle that they have to do. And this is part of that judging and perceiving difference. Sometimes when someone with a J preference says, oh, we can go anywhere for dinner, anywhere might not really mean anywhere, right? I see a lot of cliches where husbands and wives, and there's even like a TikTok or an Instagram reel trend where there's a guy and a girl, and the guy was like, oh, I'm going to take you to your favorite place. And the subcontext is that he doesn't know what the favorite place is. And he's waiting for her to say, oh my gosh, we're going to such and such place. And so it's kind of a cliche a little bit. However, separate from gender, this J and this P thing looms large in terms of our preference towards we can go anywhere and what that might actually mean in practical terms. And then similarly, some people with J preferences struggle when there are too many options, when there are too many possibilities. That preference type can break down a little bit. This is when they can connect with their perceiver colleagues and say, hey, this is really not going according to plan. You seem to not mind so much when things don't go according to plan. Let me borrow your brain for a little bit about now that this has not worked, what are some other possibilities that we could map moving forward? And so it's one of those things where leaning on other folks, it can be important. So that's, again, part of that initial way of understanding the judging and perceiving dichotomy. But let's look at the other way. The other way, which I alluded to on the last slide, is about helping us understand of your middle two letters, which is the most important part of you in Jungian terms, which is the second most important part of you, what's the third most important part, and what's the fourth most important part. That fourth most important part, the inferior complex, or the blind spot, as Isabella Briggs-Myers called it, that one is one we're going to talk about in just a minute. But it is a powerful, powerful way to think about stress and managing stress. This is the order of type. So if you'll notice, let's take the top left corner, INFJ. INFJ. J tells me that this person's third letter, judging, their third letter, which is feeling, INFJ, feeling is their public face at work. All right. And so you'll notice that feeling is their number 2 on that list they have. You see the list says intuition 1, feeling 2, thinking 3, sensing 4. This is something that's interesting about introvert folks. They're number 1 in Jungian type. They're number 1, they're most dominant in Jungian type. For INFJs is intuition. Intuition makes the INFJ tick more than anything. However, they bring their feeling face, their number 2, to work with them. And that's what they show people at work. If you know you have an introvert preference, you can look on this chart and it's the top row and then the third row down, all the grouping of introvert folks. And introverts, often when I say this, I'm like, yeah, the number 1 thing on your list of that list of 4, the number 1 thing is the thing that makes you tick, and that's what your inner circle knows. But your number 2 thing is your game face you bring to work. You should see their eyes get so, they're like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Yes, this is baked into the way Jung describes our preferences and how these preferences work together. And so it's really, really fascinating. Here's the thing that's interesting though, y'all. Extroverts, so much more simple in a way. If you look at the second row and the fourth row, people with extrovert preferences, they're dominant, they're number 1 in Jungian terms, is also the face they bring to work. There's no extra labor, there's no extra thought about bringing a psychologically safe version of myself to work so I can protect what's really the most important part of my psychological makeup. So for many extroverts, learning that introverts are doing double work is new information. And so understanding that can unlock some empathy for you, dear extrovert leaders, and unlock for you a deeper understanding of what your introvert colleagues are going through. Isabella Briggs Myers, in her book Gifts Differing, alluded to that extroversion as a preference is the privileged preference in our society, that our world is built around the needs of extroverts more than it is around the needs of introverts. So today's topic is going to end a little bit early, but I am going to share that, again, this judging perceiving helps us create this order of type right here. And you'll notice, again, everyone's number 1 is your dominant. Your number 2 is called your subdominant. Now, again, introverts bring their number 2 to work with them. That's the face they wear at work. Extroverts, their game face or their work face and their dominant are the same thing. They're very simple in that regard. Your number 3 on this list is not particularly critical. Your number 3, think of it like your appendix in your body. But your number 4 is what Isabella Briggs Myers calls the blind spot, or what Jung called the inferior. The number 4 is the thing that trips you up when you're under stress. So if you look at your number 4 here, everyone has a number 4. And this is going to be my teaser for next week's session. The teaser is when you're under stress, if your number 4 is sensing, you have a little juvenile person in you that has a sensing preference who's going to probably lead you in some bad ways when you're stressed. And those bad ways are in a distinctly sensing mode versus some of you might have thinking as your number 4 or feeling or intuition. And when you think about a juvenile operating from a feeling vantage point, or a juvenile working from a thinking or logical vantage point, a juvenile trying to use intuition, a juvenile trying to use sensing, that's who we become when we're under stress. And so in next week's session, we're going to talk a little bit about how you can use this order of preference to not just understand your stress, understand the flavor of your stress, but to also understand psychologically how you could use Jungian type to climb out of that stress. So thank you for joining me today. I know today's was a little bit shorter, but we're going to be back here next week, also at noon, and we're going to be getting into the flip side of this. If today was about people with a judging preference and how some Myers-Briggs type think of people with judging preferences as uptight, what about people whose supervisors are not organized enough? What can we learn about them? I'll see you next week.